Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into how a potential second Trump administration could impact the food and beverage industry.
Right.
Specifically, how companies might need to innovate to navigate those changes.
Definitely.
We've got some fascinating analyses that use pattern recognition, examining historical trends and emerging signals to paint a picture of how this all might play out.
Sounds intriguing.
So let's just jump right in. What are some of the most significant potential changes that these analyses highlight?
Well, the potential changes are pretty broad-reaching, really impacting everything from regulations to consumer behavior. But one of the biggest shifts we could see is a move towards weaker federal oversight and deregulation.
Interesting. So if the government steps back from its role in regulating things like food safety and environmental practices, what kind of innovations might we see?
Well, historically, when the government takes a step back, the private sector tends to step in to fill the void. We've seen this happen with varying degrees of success. But in this case, it could mean a rise in independent safety certifications. These certifications could become the new symbols of trust and quality, much like the organic label we see today, assuring consumers that products meet certain standards even without that government oversight.
So if consumers become less confident in government oversight, they might start looking for these certifications as a way to ensure the safety and quality of their food.
Exactly. It puts more power in the hands of the consumer. They might start to rely more on these certifications and even develop stronger brand loyalties to companies that they perceive as being transparent and proactive about safety.
So for companies, this could mean a whole new approach to building trust. It's not just about making a product, it's about proving its worth to a more discerning consumer.
Absolutely.
Now, what about the economic policies that a second Trump administration might implement? The analyses suggest a focus on short-term economic growth, which could have interesting implications for the industry.
Yeah, if we look at historical trends, particularly during economic downturns, consumers tend to prioritize affordability above all else.
Makes sense.
This puts pressure on companies to streamline their operations and find ways to offer products that are both cost-effective and maintain a certain level of quality.
So companies might need to innovate by becoming incredibly efficient, finding ways to cut costs without cutting corners.
Precisely. They might need to streamline product lines, perhaps focusing on a smaller core set of offerings to reduce production costs, and then find innovative ways to maintain quality while keeping prices competitive.
It's a delicate balance, but it seems like a necessary one in this potential scenario.
Absolutely. And they'd also need to communicate these changes transparently to avoid alienating consumers who are already sensitive to price fluctuations.
It seems like clear communication is going to be vital in almost every aspect of adapting to this potential future.
Definitely.
The analyses also point to a potential fragmentation of public health infrastructure, with agencies like the CDC potentially being downsized or even eliminated. How would this kind of shift in responsibility impact innovation?
This raises a critical point. If agencies like the CDC are downsized or eliminated, the responsibility for public health protocols could fall more heavily on state and private sectors. This could lead to a patchwork of differing regulations and standards across different states, creating a complex landscape for companies to navigate.
So imagine a scenario where each state has its own set of regulations for food safety and production. It sounds like a logistical challenge for companies, especially those that operate nationally.
It would be. They might need to develop new strategies for tracking and complying with varying state-level regulations.
Wow.
It could even lead to companies enhancing localization. Imagine a world where food production becomes more regional, with companies tailoring products and practices to specific state requirements.
It's like the microbrew trend, but for food, where hyperlocal sourcing and production become key differentiators. It's fascinating to consider how these potential shifts could reshape the industry. It seems like companies would need to become incredibly adaptable, constantly innovating to keep pace with changing regulations, consumer preferences, and economic conditions.
Absolutely. This is where the ability to anticipate and respond to change becomes a crucial competitive advantage. Companies that can quickly pivot, adjust their strategies, and develop new solutions will be the ones that thrive in this potential environment.
Now let's dig a little deeper into some specific areas where innovation might be particularly important. We've touched on the potential for a rise in independent safety certifications. What would that look like in practice? What kinds of innovations would we see in this area?
Well, we could see the emergence of a whole new system of third-party organizations that assess food companies based on a range of safety standards. Everything from ingredient sourcing and manufacturing processes to hygiene practices could be evaluated,
Right.
and companies that meet these standards would be able to display a certification label on their products, providing consumers with a clear signal of quality and safety.
That's an intriguing concept. A whole new system of trust built around these certifications.
Right.
It almost feels like a response to this potential decline in government oversight, giving consumers a way to make informed choices in an environment where they might feel less certain about the safety of their food.
Exactly. And this is where innovation becomes paramount. For the system to be effective, it needs to be credible, transparent, and easy for consumers to understand. It can't just be a bunch of different labels with varying standards that confuse people.
So would this require a level of standardization? Perhaps an industry-wide effort to create a unified system that's easily recognizable and trusted by consumers.
That's one potential solution. It could be a government-led initiative, an independent nonprofit, or even an industry-led effort. The key is to ensure transparency and accountability so consumers feel confident in the system.
And this need for transparency seems to be a recurring theme. Whether it's about safety certifications, ingredient sourcing, or production practices, it seems like companies will need to be much more open and upfront with consumers about what's in their food and how it's made.
Transparency is going to be crucial. Consumers are becoming more discerning and more demanding. They want to know the story behind their food, and they want to be assured that companies are operating ethically and sustainably.
So we're not just talking about listing ingredients on a label. We're talking about a deeper level of transparency. It's about giving consumers a window into the entire process from farm to fork.
Precisely. This could involve things like using real-time tracking platforms to allow consumers to see exactly where their food comes from and how it's produced. It could involve being more transparent about sourcing practices, manufacturing processes, and even pricing strategies.
This level of transparency seems almost radical compared to how many companies operate today. It would require a fundamental shift in thinking and a willingness to embrace a new level of openness.
It would, but I think it's a shift that's inevitable. Consumers are already demanding it, and companies that resist are likely to fall behind.
So transparency is not just a moral imperative, it's becoming a business imperative.
Absolutely. In this potential future, transparency is no longer optional, it's the price of entry.
And this brings us back to innovation. How can companies innovate to become more transparent in a way that resonates with consumers and builds trust?
That's the challenge, and it's one that will require creativity, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of consumer needs and expectations.
So as we continue this deep dive, we'll need to explore specific ways companies can innovate to meet these challenges.
We will. We'll need to examine how they can navigate this complex web of potential changes while meeting the evolving demands of a more informed and empowered consumer. One area where innovation and communication will be absolutely crucial is in how companies approach these independent safety certifications. It's not enough to just have the certification you need to tell the story behind it.
You're right. Consumers need to understand what these certifications mean and why they should care. How can companies effectively communicate the value of these certifications in a way that resonates with consumers?
Well, imagine a world where food labels go beyond just listing ingredients and start incorporating things like QR codes that link to detailed information about the product's journey, including the specific safety protocols that were followed at each step.
Yep.
This kind of transparency can build trust by empowering consumers with knowledge.
So it's about going beyond just slapping a label on a product and hoping for the best. It's about actively engaging with consumers, educating them, and giving them the tools they need to make informed choices.
Precisely. Companies could leverage digital platforms, social media, even interactive in-store displays to tell the story of their commitment to safety. It's about turning transparency into a tangible, engaging experience for the consumer.
This would require a significant shift in how companies approach marketing and communication. It's almost like they need to become educators, guiding consumers through this new landscape of certifications and standards.
It's a shift that many companies might be hesitant to embrace, but it's one that could ultimately benefit both the industry and the consumer. Imagine a world where consumers feel more confident in their food choices, and companies are rewarded for their commitment to transparency and safety.
Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about another potential challenge. Companies might face balancing affordability with quality. If consumers become more price sensitive, how can companies innovate to deliver products that meet their needs without sacrificing quality?
One possibility is to reimagine product lines focusing on a core set of high-quality, affordable offerings. It's about simplifying choices for the consumer while still ensuring that they're getting good value for their money.
Got it.
Think of it like a curated selection of essentials carefully chosen for quality and affordability.
So it's not just about making things cheaper. It's about making smart choices about which products to offer and how to produce them efficiently.
Exactly. And it's about being transparent with consumers about those choices. If you're streamlining your product line or changing sourcing practices to keep costs down, communicate that to your customers. Let them know that you're committed to providing affordable options without compromising on quality.
This ties back to the importance of communication and transparency. If consumers understand the reasoning behind these changes, they're more likely to accept them.
Absolutely. It's about building a relationship of trust with consumers where they understand that you're making decisions with their best interests in mind.
We've talked a lot about potential challenges, but let's flip the script for a moment and talk about opportunities. Could these potential shifts also create opportunities for innovation?
Absolutely. One area where we might see interesting innovations is in the realm of localized production. If we see a rise in state-level regulation, it could create an environment where companies need to adapt their products and practices to meet specific regional demands. This could lead to a resurgence in local sourcing, with companies building closer relationships with regional suppliers and producers.
So imagine a future where food production becomes more decentralized, with companies operating smaller, more agile production facilities closer to their consumers. It's a model that's already gaining traction in some sectors like craft brewing.
Exactly. And it's a model that could offer a number of benefits, both for companies and for consumers. For companies, it could mean reduced transportation costs, greater flexibility, and the ability to tailor products to specific regional tastes. For consumers, it could mean fresher, higher quality products, a closer connection to the source of their food, and a greater sense of community.
A fascinating possibility. This kind of shift could also create opportunities for smaller, more nimble companies to compete, leading to greater diversity and innovation in the marketplace.
It could also lead to the development of new technologies and solutions to address the challenges of localized production. Imagine, for example, the emergence of modular production facilities that can be easily adapted to produce a variety of products based on local demand.
Or the development of new supply chain platforms that connect local producers with regional buyers, creating a more efficient and transparent system.
The potential for innovation is immense. It's about seeing these potential shifts not just as challenges, but as opportunities to reimagine how we produce and consume food.
We've talked a lot about the role of companies in navigating these potential changes. But what about consumers? How might their behavior shift in response to these changes? And how can companies anticipate and respond to those shifts?
Consumers are going to become even more discerning and demanding, especially if they're feeling less secure about things like government oversight and food safety. They're going to be looking for brands that they can trust, brands that are transparent about their practices, and brands that align with their values.
So companies can't just assume that consumers will continue to buy their products out of habit or brand loyalty. They need to actively engage with consumers, build relationships, and demonstrate their commitment to meeting their needs and expectations.
Exactly. This could involve things like creating more personalized experiences, offering greater customization, and engaging consumers in conversations about the future of food. It's about moving beyond a transactional relationship and building a genuine partnership with consumers.
This potential shift in consumer behavior presents both challenges and opportunities for companies.
It does. Those who can adapt and innovate to meet the evolving needs and expectations of consumers will thrive. Those who cling to outdated models and practices may find themselves struggling to stay afloat.
It's a fascinating time to be in the food and beverage industry. The potential for disruption is high, but so is the potential for positive change and innovation.
Absolutely. It's a time for companies to be bold, to think differently, and to embrace the opportunities that lie ahead.
Now let's delve a little deeper into the potential impact of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the industry. His stance on food policy could significantly impact how companies approach innovation.
Kennedy's known for his criticism of processed foods and his advocacy for cleaner, more natural ingredients. If he were to have a significant influence on food policy, we could see a real push towards reformulation and a focus on transparency around ingredients and processing methods.
This could have a ripple effect throughout the entire industry. Companies might need to rethink their sourcing practices, their manufacturing processes, and even their marketing strategies.
Imagine a scenario where consumer demand for cleaner labels, driven in part by potential policy changes, leads to a complete overhaul of product formulations. Companies might need to invest heavily in research and development, seeking out natural alternatives to artificial ingredients and finding innovative ways to preserve flavor and quality without resorting to heavily processed methods.
This could be a challenging but ultimately positive development for the industry. It could lead to healthier, more sustainable products and a greater focus on transparency and authenticity.
It could also create opportunities for new players to enter the market, companies that are built around these values from the ground up.
It seems like we're seeing a convergence of trends here. Potential policy changes, shifting consumer demands, and a growing awareness of the impact of our food choices on our health and the environment.
This convergence is creating a powerful force for change in the industry. Companies that can anticipate and respond to these trends will be the ones that shape the future of food.
Now let's explore another key area where innovation will be essential: communicating sustainability efforts.
This is an area where companies often struggle. They may be making significant strides in sustainability, but they're not effectively communicating those efforts to consumers.
And why is that a problem? Why does it matter if consumers are aware of a company's sustainability efforts?
It matters because consumers are increasingly making purchasing decisions based on their values. They want to support companies that are doing good for the planet and for society. If a company isn't effectively communicating its sustainability efforts, it's missing out on a major opportunity to connect with consumers and build brand loyalty.
So it's not just about doing the right thing. It's about letting consumers know that you're doing the right thing.
Exactly, and it's about doing it in a way that's authentic, transparent, and engaging. Consumers are savvy. They can spot greenwashing a mile away. So companies need to be genuine in their efforts and transparent in their communication.
What are some specific ways companies can innovate in this area? How can they effectively communicate their sustainability efforts in a way that resonates with consumers?
One approach is to focus on storytelling. Instead of just listing facts and figures, share the stories behind your sustainability efforts. Tell consumers about the farmers you're working with, the innovative practices you're implementing, and the positive impact you're making on the environment and communities.
So it's about making sustainability personal and relatable?
Exactly. It's about connecting with consumers on an emotional level and showing them that you're not just a company, you're a group of people who care about making a difference.
Another approach is to use technology to make sustainability more transparent and engaging.
Absolutely. Imagine using blockchain technology to track the journey of your ingredients from farm to fork, giving consumers unprecedented visibility into your supply chain. Or using augmented reality to create interactive experiences that educate consumers about your sustainability efforts.
These are just a few examples of the many ways companies can innovate to communicate their sustainability efforts in a more impactful way.
The key is to be creative, to experiment, and to find what works best for your brand and your audience.
It seems like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, exploring a wide range of potential challenges and opportunities facing the food and beverage industry in a potential second Trump administration. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one final area where innovation will be crucial.
What's that?
It's the area of consumer empowerment. We've talked about how consumers are becoming more informed and demanding, but how can companies actually empower them to make choices that align with their values and their needs?
That's a great point. It's one thing to acknowledge that consumers are becoming more powerful, but it's another thing entirely to actually cede some of that power and create systems and structures that genuinely empower them.
So how can food and beverage companies innovate to really empower the consumer?
It's about moving beyond simply providing information and actually giving consumers more control over their food choices.
Can you give us some specific examples of what that might look like?
Certainly. One way is to offer more customizable product options. Imagine being able to choose the exact ingredients you want in your food or even design your own flavor combinations. This kind of customization puts the power in the hands of the consumer, allowing them to create products that perfectly align with their tastes and preferences.
That's a fascinating concept.
Yeah.
It's almost like taking the idea of personalization to a whole new level. It's not just about recommending products you might like, it's about letting you design the products you want.
Precisely. It's about shifting from a model of mass production to a model of mass customization. This kind of innovation would require companies to rethink their entire supply chains and production processes, but it could be a game changer in terms of consumer empowerment.
And it seems like this trend toward customization would align well with the growing demand for transparency. Consumers want to know what's in their food and where it comes from, and the ability to customize would give them even more control over those aspects.
Absolutely. It's about giving consumers agency, not just in terms of what they eat, but also in terms of how their food is produced and sourced. This kind of transparency and control could lead to a deeper level of trust and engagement between companies and consumers.
It's almost like a shift from a parent-child relationship to a more collaborative partnership where companies and consumers are working together to create the food system of the future.
That's a great analogy. Companies would need to start seeing consumers not just as passive recipients of products, but as active participants in the process of creating those products.
This brings us back to the importance of communication and transparency. Companies would need to be very clear about the options available to consumers and how they can exercise their power to customize.
They would also need to be open to feedback and willing to adapt based on consumer input. It's about creating a dynamic system where companies and consumers are constantly learning from each other and working together to shape the future of food.
It seems like this potential future is full of both challenges and opportunities for the food and beverage industry.
It certainly is. Companies that are willing to embrace change, to innovate, and to truly partner with consumers will be the ones that thrive in this new landscape.
And ultimately, the consumer stands to benefit the most from these changes.
Absolutely. They'll have access to healthier, more sustainable, and more personalized food choices. They'll have a greater understanding of how their food is produced, and they'll have a more powerful voice in shaping the future of the industry.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the potential impact of a second Trump administration on the food and beverage industry, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the future of food is not predetermined. It's something that we're all shaping together through our choices as consumers, as citizens, and as members of a global community.
And that's an empowering thought. It means that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable, equitable, and delicious food system.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, think about the choices you're making. What kind of food are you buying? Where is it coming from? Who is producing it? Are you supporting companies that align with your values?
These are questions we should all be asking ourselves.
Yeah.
And as we've seen in this deep dive, the answers to those questions are likely to become even more complex and nuanced in the years to come.
But that complexity also presents an opportunity for innovation and positive change. If we approach these challenges with creativity, collaboration, and a willingness to embrace new ideas, we can create a food system that benefits everyone.
So stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hungry for change.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, deep divers.